and welcome to Wednesday Wisdom with Will. With this new series that we've launched from Capria Ventures, we want to share all our knowledge about generative AI, but also learn with you along the way. The wise Will of our Wednesday Wisdom with Will is, of course, our co-founder and evangelist in chief about generative AI, Will Poole. Will, welcome. I want to jump right in. This morning, I checked with Bing Copilot about what the most exciting news around generative AI was. And it gave me some very interesting 10 updates. But I think what it missed is what's happening in India. India is now keen on backing sovereign AIs. What is developing there, Will? What can you tell us about that?
Sovereign AIs, they were a given from the very beginning, even before ChatGPT shipped, because we knew that China was never going to allow every citizen of China to go and depend on getting answers from a technology created by the West. So they've been, from the very beginning, blocking ultimately and building their own sovereign AIs there. And of course, it wasn't going to be very long before others follow that. And the reason for that is twofold. One is obviously national interests have particular points of view that they want to make sure are protected, or even laws they want to make sure are upheld correctly, and they don't want to necessarily outsource that or depend on a third party to do that correctly. And the other one is they have priorities that might be different. So for a country like India that has 15 languages on the currency and 22 national languages, hey, training well on all those languages that matter to 1.4 billion people is no small task, and it's probably not a high priority for Google or OpenAI or anybody else to do that as well as what India needs to address the needs of its population.
And it's too expensive to outsource it to the West.
Well, it's not just expense, right? In fact, you could argue the flip side, which is it too expensive to build your own sovereign AI? And given that they cost literally hundreds of millions of dollars to train, the answer is many countries can't do this, even if they want to. India obviously has the wherewithal to do it. China clearly has it. Any major European nation is going to have the capability. And I think every nation is going to have to decide, do they want to try to go down a path of sovereign AI building, or do they want to find some, maybe it's a bilateral agreement with a Google or an OpenAI to make sure that their interests are addressed?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, given that this is the world the way it will be. Well, I'm jumping into our next segment, and it's called Ask Will. Here we actually look at questions that the community sends us. And I got a question here. There are so many LLMs now. There's ChatGPT, there's Gemini, there's Mistral, there's Llama. They all seem very good. Which should we use to get our first prototype going?
There's one thing that I've said from the very beginning is don't make any decisions that you can't undo in 30 days or even less. Which means that whatever you pick, make sure that you isolate what you're doing enough such that you can switch to something else if something else better comes along. And I think for the most part, founders are doing that. The easiest place that most people are starting are with the OpenAI public APIs that are pretty easy to get a hold of. But many are also recognizing that there's benefits in terms of either availability or latency or control to adopting one of the other models, and either whether it's running it on your own cloud instance or some other way to get the additional benefits of the innovation that's happening through those other models. I think that most that are in the early days want to be able to try out different ones, check for their performance differences, check for their accuracy. I mean, all of these things have strengths and weaknesses. And so I think being able to be agile and not to get locked into any one path is the right answer for anybody that's in the early days of their GenAI work.
No, thanks. The next one's a very, very specific question, so I'm actually going to read it out. We are preparing to integrate GenAI into a mission-critical medical application. When reports came out a few weeks ago of ChatGPT spewing craziness, we were more than a little concerned. What do you recommend we do?
If you think about the move from on-premises to cloud that happened going on, whatever, 10, 15 years ago, as people had to basically give up control of the core infrastructure that ran their application, they had the same kinds of concerns. They said, hey, how do I make sure that a cloud provider provides multiple clouds in different places in case a internet cable gets cut? How do I make sure that I'm fault tolerant and so on? And that's pretty much worked out over time. And I think the same kinds of things are going to happen with the infrastructure that comes with generative AI. So I think a developer that's building a mission critical application first is going to want to make sure that they're working with a provider that can give them service level agreements that are guaranteed uptime, guaranteed response time, things like that. And also, though, have the ability, per my earlier point, to maybe be able to switch on the fly from one LLM to another one. So there's some additional overhead, some additional engineering to do to make sure that's the case. But I think, particularly given the speed at which these things are evolving and the fact that we've not begun to see some of the both amazing innovations that will continue to pile up and some of the bad things that will happen with failures of some form or another, I think being resilient is critical. I think everybody's got to design for resilience.
I'm moving into our next segment, Will. What keeps Will up at night? With this, there have been so many conversations around generative AI, and it'll continue to be. And a lot of it is also about a moral imperative. What keeps you up?
One thing that keeps me up at night is just wondering when is the next shoe going to drop in this space, and how can I ensure that as we make our investing decisions, as we guide our founders, how can we make sure that we are trying to look a little further around the corner than maybe some others are?
What I like most about this conversation we're having, and I know how much time you're spending around generative AI. In fact, I think you have a mini Microsoft going on the side. But the one thing that you keep emphasizing is the caution, the underlying idea of caution through all of this, right? Be cautiously optimistic.
Well, I was going to say caution, but at the same time, move fast, because and that maybe be another thing that might keep me up at night is people not moving fast enough. So it's got two sides of a coin there, right? And if you don't move fast enough, somebody else is going to move faster and run ahead of you. And that's true for us as investors, it's true for founders. And so you have to run ahead fast, but be cautious, recognizing there's unknown around the corner. So it's an interesting thing. I was mountain biking in Hawaii a couple of years ago, and I learned the hard way going through the jungle that you have to both look up and down at the same time. Because if you don't look down, you miss a route. If you don't look up, a tree hits you in the head. And so similarly, in this world of generative AI, you've got to both be moving ahead fast, but also being cautious, knowing there's some unknown out ahead of you, which might seem to be impossible to do, but that's what we all have to do.
Our next segment is about the breakthrough innovation of the month. And we have some really exciting companies in our portfolio doing amazing things already. I use the word amazing lightly because I understand it's early days, but they're doing some really incredible stuff with generative AI, and Masai School is one of them. Talk to us, Will, about what Masai is doing.
So first of all, they are the largest synchronous coding school, I think, in the world at this point. There's some people that do asynchronous work, self-paced, that are larger, but in terms of where you have a cohort of students going together and learning coding hour by hour together, day by day, these guys are the biggest, and they're producing a huge number of entry-level, both front-end, back-end, and full-stack developers through this program. The first thing that they did that was exciting was that they took their entire admission program and moved it to a combination of AI and automation, such that the 10,000 or so applications that they look at every month, they can reduce that down to 1,000 people they admit into their programs with only one person overseeing, and basically all that person is doing is making sure nothing bad happens. It's entirely automated. So the second thing they're doing, I've been involved in ed tech for 2 decades now, and we've always talked about the idea of adaptive learning. Meaning if you're a student and you're at the head of your class, the teacher can't actually teach to your needs. The teacher actually has to teach to about the middle of the class. And if you're a poor student and you're behind, the teacher can't teach to your needs either. So what Masai is doing is saying, hey, we can actually have an AI-based teacher in the early days of helping these students go from their very earliest journey in learning coding, and it can give them adaptive teaching based on where they are. If they're the head of the class, they go faster. Middle of the class, they go medium. If they're not doing as well, it takes them longer, but it keeps them all moving forward. And this idea of doing adaptive AI delivery of learning again, it's not a new idea, but these guys are actually doing it and doing it at scale.
I'm moving now to what's up Global South. We're all about the Global South. Will, what are you seeing? What developments are you seeing that are quite significant across this region?
I think one of the things that we're seeing recently is a couple of our jurisdictions that we invest in have had some serious currency challenges, much more so than expected. We have a portfolio company in Argentina. They've had currency issues for decades, not a surprise there. They've had to try to build their business in Brazil to help bring some stability to revenue there. We have two businesses, one in Egypt and one in Nigeria, each of which have had serious problems because of currency going down by on the order of 50% over the last 12 or 18 months. Interestingly, so the founders, of course, are there growing their business in local currency. They're doubling their business. And you should feel really good about doubling your business in a given year, right? If you're a founder in a high-speed startup. But if the currency goes down by half on dollar terms, you're actually treading water. You haven't moved at all, right? So one of the trends that we are seeing is founders that are in these, let's call them currency challenged markets, are looking to expand more rapidly internationally than they would have otherwise, because they have to survive, to be able to have the money they need to show the actual dollar-based growth that investors want to see, and for them to be able to compete globally. So for example, we see two of those companies I just referred to are actually looking to do business in GCC, in the Gulf Cooperation area, so UAE, Saudi, and so on. Because they see stable currencies, they see less pressure on margins, more willingness to pay, and they can grow. And of course, they've got a business that's digital in nature, and they can deliver value in multiple countries. And that's actually coming back to GenAI. As companies and founders look at expanding internationally more quickly, having the ability to have languages that can be adapted and translations that can happen fluidly and inexpensively is going to make it possible to do that quicker expansion.
In a lot of ways, we are in a very defining moment for what can happen with businesses. Will, our conversation today is just a start. I learned a lot. I hope everybody watching learned something. And we also want to hear from you. What are you thinking? What can you add to our learning? How can we help you learn better? But for today, it's a wrap. Thank you, Wise Will. I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Sandhya.